The End of Modernism, a Critique. In these days, leading financial experts have recommended the European Union doubling the so-called bailout in the wake of the EU financial crisis from €750 billion to €1.5 trillion. The most surprising fact for me was that this has caused so little excitement. It has been recognized with the same apathy as if a pound of butter costs 3 cents more tomorrow. I think this apathy is almost more remarkable than the phenomenon itself, and that's something hot in the face of the sun. Perhaps it is simply the size of the sum that the average citizen can think of as little as of astronomical proportions. Or are we all so certain of the impending doom that we dismiss it with a shrug? I felt it was a scandal, and yes, it is only the latest and certainly not the last peak of development for 20 years. For me, the scandal is simply but this. Foreigners decide about our German money, trillions of new sums differing depending on the mood of the day. Our voice? Zero. And the effect and meaning are at best dubious. Now it is certainly not such a surprising thing for most Germans to see that our politicians have at best a vague idea of reality, or the so-called democratic politicians of other countries, but the assumption that countries like Greece, Italy or Portugal could ever meet such an economic power or have such an economic discipline in order to pay back €1.5 trillion, I think that's a dimension of reality denial that even my skeptical view of politicians has very much surpassed. An argument that one hears again and again: this money is not but a guarantee and not a gift. Of course this is formally correct. The fact is, though, that this is a pot available for loans from which other countries can take as they need. What pressure to economize oneself remains for the EU countries if they have the confidence to get money away on this scale? Do we not destroy every pressure for better economy in the nations if we provide huge amounts of credit? We will not just cause the contrary, a convenience of levity. And we are talking about loans, so it is indeed money a country gets. So we can hope that we get the credit back. But how realistic is that in the face of such sums and such countries? Here the politicians act as if all of a sudden and surprisingly previously stable countries were plunged into a deep debt. But the opposite is true. Countries such as Greece, Portugal and Italy have always been economically weak, with rising debt and with little budgetary discipline. Or simply, they have always spent much more than they had, and that is well known to everyone for years. The overall budgetary positions and debt levels were indeed no state secrets, and yet we all led these countries against better knowledge into the euro on the European market in the absurd hope that these countries, after decades of mismanagements, were suddenly seriously financial marketplaces. You really don't have to be a cynic to see how these expectations were overstressed and absurd. The other argument they just presented to us Germans like a mantra for 20 years from all sides: there are no alternatives to a united Europe. I deny that vehemently. There are always alternatives, but they are not enforceable in the current political landscape. Let us look at the 5 parties in the German parliament, the Bundestag, and we will find that they all have programs that actually only differ in nuances. One might think it a bona fide contemporary, maybe all parties are so reasonable and they all have in common lots of insights in their mind. Given the economic doom we face in our system, this is something the politicians can hardly claim to their benefit. So if one is an advocate of national independence and EU critic, he wonders that no single party in the German parliament is skeptical toward Europe. On the contrary, all parties want the euro, they all want billions of bailout, they all want more rights for the EU in Brussels. Differences only exist in small formalities. Who wants more German sovereignty and less patronizing view remains at the election with only extremists like the NPD, the Communist Party or the Christian Center Party. One thing we must not forget. If they ever talk about the aid for Greece, then this is a huge scam. Help here is not meant for the Greek people, but the banks, the big capitalists and speculators who invested and reinvested money in Greece. These speculators are to blame for the crisis here, and they get the help. The simple Greek workers, employees and retirees will not get any help. If a small pensioner from Athens, because of the crisis tomorrow, can't pay his electricity or water, he won't be aided for the bailout for Greece with a single cent. Help will come to the speculators, the shareholders who have driven the country into crisis, the bank and the lazy stockholders who are sitting at home and earn millions of euros by doing nothing. Those will get help here. But the fact is that more and more things have been decided through regulations from Brussels, like the co-camber curvature norm and the light bulb regulation, by committees and bodies which here in Germany are unknown to people, who are not legitimized by our people in any way and who are not accountable to anyone. And on what grounds have we been sold to this? With the nebulous spectre of globalization. Now it may well be that today the economy there are several large companies in competition with overseas regions, but I deny that this competition is more severe objectively. An industrialist in the late 19th century had also been found in sharp competition, but not against countries like China or Japan, but domestic and neighboring countries. But what was true then is true today, namely that economies are essentially a national competition. A buyer can either buy a French Peugeot or a German Volkswagen. National economies are essentially competitors. And once you get by a few large projects such as aircraft or space flight aside, we have to deal with our national economy first. For individual projects there is always a possibility of bilateral cooperation, which could be arranged for a project at a time without having to give away all the competences from our governments permanently to foreign politicians.